Hello. We're doing a music review today. Let's go. Hello, everybody. Jostany Cotano here, the internet's busiest
Insert interest here.
nerd, and it's time for a review of Solar Field's Reflective Frequencies Remastered album 2021 edition special. This is kind of coming out of nowhere for any of you who know the regular content that I produce on my channel, but I want to tell you a little story about how I sort of came across this. For those of you who don't know, Solar Fields is the mastermind behind those Mirror's Edge games. A lot of parkour, a lot of cool fast flying, highfalutin sort of tricks that you got going on there. Really good games. And they produced a really just like kick-ass soundtrack for those games. I've played the first one a lot, they're really great. But they also make other music on the side, which I have also listened to. And this one album that they released back in 2001, I think, Reflective Frequencies, was an album that I had in my music library for a little while. And there are a couple tracks on that album where, it's mostly electronic stuff that we're talking about. There's this one track, Echoing Spectrum, which I really, really liked. I thought it really just had this nice sort of just like mystical vibe to it. And I've always been really disappointed with the fact that it is only like 4 or 5 minutes long, especially because it's got this really like groovy beat at the end that I was really like settling into, and then the track ends. So I was like, gosh, I always wished that there would be some sort of extended mix of this track to listen to. Maybe I'll get lucky in the future. And I took that thought and I sort of stored it way in the back of my head and never thought about it again. So it turns out an extended album was released a couple months ago by the time I found out about it. So I went and I listened to it, and I was gunning for this extended Echoing Spectrum track and a couple of other extended mixes I was curious about, because I do like other tracks on the album as well. And so what did I think about it? Well, that is why this video exists. Today we're going to just offer some of my personal thoughts on the album, less from like an objective kind of music critique standpoint, if such a thing exists, and more so I can introduce you to the side of myself that thinks about music every so often. I do my own music. I play drums, and I have been since 3rd grade, which is a bunch of years ago. So yeah, that is something that I do. I am somewhat musically literate. Let's just go. Let's just have some of my thoughts. This album is sort of broken up into 3 parts. There's like the actual remasters, like the remasters with nothing added from the original tracks. And then there's some new songs thrown into the middle, and then there is the extended mixes. As far as the remasters go, I'll admit that I don't know. I didn't really hear any much difference besides things being like slightly cleaner, maybe, between the original versions and the remasters versions. So I'm just assuming, I gave them a listen and they all sounded pretty good. So I'm assuming that they are good remasters. I don't know the technical parts that go into that, so I won't spend time talking about those as well. So with that out of the way, we can get on to the new songs in the album. I really wonder how many people are going to watch this video. Really, this video is intended for Solar Fields themselves, so as long as they watch it, that is the audience that I wanted, so there we go. That'll be satisfactory. So the first new song is one called Blind Signal. This one sounds like kind of a beefier version of another original song, Outlined Surfaces. If I had to guess as to why it didn't make it onto the album in the first place, with my limited production knowledge, I would say it's like maybe they were deciding between Outlined Surfaces and Blind Signal to put onto the album. And maybe at this point in the album where Outlined Surfaces gets onto the album, they decided they needed more sort of like a lighter break, and this one's kind of like an alternate version of Outlined Surfaces, so maybe they just chose the prior over this one, and this one just ended up on the cutting room floor. It's alright, it's fine. The second one, Simulated Effect, it kind of meanders. A couple of Solar Field songs that I've listened to on this album sort of do this. They just sort of like, they go to an idea and then they just sort of like just go to sort of like another one, and they end up somewhere completely different from where they started. It's got a lot of loop-de-loops and vocal undertones in the end, which are kind of interesting. It just makes me wonder about the entire process that goes into deciding what sounds to keep in an album or in a song, and which ones to throw out. Yeah, it seems like a very experimental track, which I guess is why it didn't make it into the final version of the album. Cotton Fudge Cream Clouds. This one is like, it doesn't fit on the album at all, like the general feeling. So it also sounds like it's so different that it almost sounds like it was made by a completely different musician. I haven't explored the rest of Solarfield's catalog, but I'm pretty sure like this doesn't sound anywhere remotely close to something that I would consider Solarfield's. It also sounds like super rudimentary as compared to how I perceive Solarfield's to sort of do their thing. It feels like this was made by a novice on like FL Studios or something. It's kind of, I don't know, you listen to it and you hear it right away. Symbolic is interesting because it's probably my favorite out of the new songs, because this one definitely does not sound like other ones on the album that much, but it really does have this strong melody that starts it off, and it has its own sort of distinct synthy sound that really kind of makes it its own thing, and I think it's really good. I just don't think it fits in with the other songs on the album, so I guess I understand if it was cut, maybe that's what happens. Yeah. Around 3 or 4 minutes in on this track, there are these other sort of peripheral sounds that come in that you can hear very similar ones on other tracks on this album. And because this had its own unique sound to start off with, they almost feel out of place. Like I sort of feel like those other sort of sound effects were kind of like kept out of this one, and just treat it as its own thing, completely independent of like the Reflective Frequencies title, So we have Spherical Noise Disturbance. There's a long gone edit of Breathing Neutron Empire. It feels more ethereal to me than the original version, which is kind of nice, at least in the beginning, and then it gets heavier, this heavier beat comes in. And this is sort of like the thing that I've noticed happens, not on just this one, but also other tracks in the extended mix as well, is that Solarfield's like plays around with this idea of having like a very sort of like ethereal, airy, just kind of like light feeling to some of the atmospheres that they introduce into some of their tracks. And then a couple minutes later, they bring in this just like giant pounding beat that completely changes the feel. And maybe that's like the way that they want to do it. Maybe that's just like a style that they have. We'll talk more about that later in this video. It's not something I necessarily agree with. Then we have Self-Transforming Experience third movement, and this I guess is a follow-up to the original Self-Transforming Experience's first and second movement tracks. This one seems to start off with just playing the entire original first movement, and then it moves into the beats of the second movement, and it doesn't really do that much besides it, except for this really annoying synth that comes in for no discernible reason. It sticks out so much, and I'm just like, why would you put that in? And it's a bit repetitive as well, which I'm sort of split on. The Self-Transforming Experience, like between this one, the original two, and then the extended mixes of the original two that come later in the album, make up for a lot of like the same themes in the album, which I think is good if you try to like treat it from a meditative perspective, but if you don't and you're looking for something else out of this album, then it can seem like a lot of the same sort of like themes playing over and over again, sometimes hard to tell what distinguishes one track from the other. So those are the new songs. Now let's get into the proper extended mixes. I was really interested to be like, how do they take these songs that I sort of grew up with a little bit a couple of years ago and extend them? Do they do it in a good way that makes me feel good? Do they take it in a completely different direction that makes me feel not as good? Or somewhere in between? Let's see what they did. So the first one, the extended mix of 6.7, really the only thing that they changed on this is that they fleshed out the middle a little bit more, which was kind of, as like an opener. It was cool to see it be like, oh, like go in a new kind of like direction. You think this measure is going to happen next, but then it sort of like trots off and you're going down this new path a little bit. It's a little bit of an exploration. The middle kind of feels like it hangs a bit. I think 6.7 on the original album was one of the slightly shorter tracks, but I feel like it like wrapped itself up pretty nicely, like in the time that it was given. So to have this extended mix, the extended mix feels like it overstays its welcome a tiny bit. I'll probably prefer the original version due to that. The extended version of Floating Channels, I would say, is one of the better extended mixes, at least to me. It's one of more of my favorites. The beginning starts off with this really, like, crazy, just, like, rush of wind and sound and whatever, but it still feels like a sort of natural mutation and extension of the other themes that are present in the song. The extension in the middle part makes me think that this version was actually the original version that was produced, and then it was cut down for the album. It made me go back and listen to the original version, and it scratched an itch that I think was not addressed for a few years in the back of my head. It's like this one section, which I'll play right here. So you can hear there's kind of like a sort of dissolve cut that makes it feel like those two sections didn't originally go together. Yeah, so there's that. It makes me feel like this extended version was the original version that was made and then they cut it down for time's sake or whatever. So we get to the extended version of Self-Transforming Experience Part 1. This is super long, like really long. Makes me feel like it was made for like a meditative purpose instead of like a more sort of like, I guess, active listening, or however you would call that. What made the original first and second movements interesting is that the first movement never really established a groove as much as it was an ambient piece. And then the second movement establishes a sort of like underlying rhythmic groove, which makes it seem like the second movement actually evolved out of the first one. This new extended version plays around with the groove motif for most of the time, so that separation is sort of blurred. So it just seems like it's combining the two separate energy levels from the originals and putting it into one song, which I don't know. It sort of destroys that feeling of evolution throughout the album for me, and it just jams it all into this like basically 20-minute thing. So then we get to the extended mix of Blue Light and Red Vortex, which Blue Light was originally one song and Red Vortex was originally another song. And played back to back, they always felt like, to me, those original versions should have been like basically treated as part of the same track, because it seems like they tell like a really nice story together. So it's nice that they are combined in this extended mix to sort of be with each other. These two, along with Echoing Spectrum, I would say were my favorites on the original album as well. So I was really interested to see, what did they decide to do with them? Turns out I didn't agree with the choices that they made, so I felt let down a little bit. There's this part in the middle where you already have this very like high-pitched, annoying like bells instrument that goes off, and then they add this very artificial like pitch bend up to it, which you're probably hearing right now, hopefully, and it's just like grating on my ears, and I just don't like the gosh. And then the synth sort of thing happens in the middle, like the out of place synth, they like throw it in there again. They have this new middle segment that has a really nice like background ambience, just like this chilling, just like thing going on, and it's appropriately like tense and anxiety inducing, which I feel like was the main point of the original Blue Light Red Vortex sort of thing, is that these are very like tense, anxious songs with a lot of like minor key stuff going on and whatever. The problem is that besides that ambient that I described earlier, is that the rest of this new middle segment is kind of like way too melodic and dainty to fit with the rest of that like tense, anxiety inducing whatever. So I don't think it fits very well because of that. And then you have the ending, which you have this really like pounding. Now I know I sort of criticized like the all of a sudden like sort of pounding nature of some of these tracks earlier in this review. But you got these like crashing cymbals at the end that establish this really nice beat, which I agreed with in the original version of Red Vortex specifically. And then they screwed it up here. All of a sudden, that's supposed to just like come out of nowhere in the original track and just like provide this really like appropriately bombastic ending to the end of Red Vortex. But here they like have this groove, and then all of a sudden like the cymbals sort of like bleed into it, and then you have the cymbals, like the hard cymbals, and this nice groove happening at the same time. I didn't agree with it at all, and then they just sort of like fade out instead of having this like weird crazy like staticky sort of thing going on. And then they end it with like a melody, so it's just like the tone has completely changed. And I personally do not like that much, so I will be sticking with the original version of Blue Bright Red Vortex as far as my listening goes. Also, the drum beat like drops out in a really weird spot. It sounds unintentional. I don't know. So now, the Echoing Spectrum extended mix. The extended version of the track that I hoped in the back of my mind for a couple of years would get an extended version, and now I'm finally listening to it. How did they do? Well, oh no. I think one of the reasons why I liked the original version of this track so much is that there are a couple of things going on in it, a couple sounds that they have that reminded me of like Mirror's Edge, but the entire feeling of this track is very toned down from the overall energy of Mirror's Edge. It's more like I would feel like this is the moment when Faith like uses like the slow-mo as she's like jumping from like crane to crane over a city, rather than like scaling all these pipes and like doing all these flips and whatever and like beating up guards and shooting them in the road, or you know. But this is much more like this sort of like, and it gets very mystical. You have all these like sort of like cool like rhythmic percussive sounds going on in this track. So what did they do? They took all of that and they took basically like another track and they pasted it on top in the worst way possible. This was the biggest disappointment of the entire extended mix for me, and it was the track that I was looking forward to the most. So let's talk about it. They added this weird vocal chant on top that's in a completely different key. The original track was in like G major. This one I'm pretty sure is in like D flat major, and those two like keys don't go very well together. This feels like two tracks pasted on top of each other. So you got this weird like secondary like chant thing going on with these really heavy drums that have no reason to be there, and this very just like bombastic I don't know. I think like if they took the idea of the thing that they pasted on top of this and made it its own track, that would be nice. But the fact that they just shoved the two of them together with no like interplay between any of the melodic notes at all, it feels like a mistake. Like, I don't know, maybe there's like some like greater music theory thing that's going on that I'm not like privy to for this, but the entire thing seemed like a mistake for me. So my hopes were dashed after listening to this. I was like, no. But, you know, that's how it is. I don't feel like talking about this track anymore. So the extended mix of Inherent Velocity, the original version of this worked pretty well because like the melody doesn't go anywhere. It's just like this constant, like the same pitch over and over again, and they build on top of it with like the rhythmic sections or whatever. And I liked it. I liked the way that worked. So what did they do with the extended mix? They gave it a melody. I was like, gosh. It's like, really, like, the majority of this album is, like, taking original idea and not just, like, extending those ideas for any of the tracks, but, like, changing the ideas themselves, which I guess is a way to go about it, but it was definitely not what I was looking forward to on this extended album at all. And this song is, like, a good example of it. Zero Rotation extended mix. The beginning extension seems good. It was nice to have a bit more time with that opening idea, and really that seems to be the only meaningful addition to this track, so... Overlapping Particles extended mix. This is such a weird track. You know, the original version has this weird dialogue in it. It's just like you have the lines of like, "What the fuck do you want?" Nothing. And then you just have these like grunts going on. We're gonna do a little bit of a story time for this actually. There's an image that has always been in my head that's been conjured up by all of like the strange things going on, and I always picture like, let's say you have, because you've got like the male voice and you've got the female voice, and here's my image that's going on in my mind. You've got like this alert sound going off, you've got like the hammering on the door. So For some reason or another, you've got this woman that wants to get like revenge of some sort on the guy. The guy, she like tracks him down, and he's working in like the back of a restaurant or something like that. So you can hear like a lot of dishes clanging in the background and whatever. And she's got like these special powers that allows her to turn into like this giant like tentacled monster or whatever, and she attacks the guy at the door and gets her revenge, which makes him like grunt and scream and whatever. You've got this like one sound at this one point that sounds like a saw, so maybe she's like going to town on him, like hacking away with the saw or whatever. Yeah, interesting imagery. It was nice to keep that for the for the extended mix. That is some sort of fever dream, whatever. Please don't psychoanalyze me based on that description that I just gave. For this extended mix itself, I don't even think anything's really that different except for the fact that the intro is extended. So it's like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever, yeah. Self-transforming experience, second movement extended. I don't really know what changed in this. These songs, these self-transforming experience themes at this point in the album, to me, just kind of took on like background. Zone 12 extended mix. They have these added percussion and string instruments, which I think work really well. They have some tone bends in here, like pitch bends, which I feel like are a bit too extreme for my taste. But other than that, it's like, it's fine. You have Nia 3, which I think was another song that I really liked on the original album. I liked the drums and bass starting off with the low ambient in the original version, as opposed to here, where you have this high-pitched stereo thing that comes in like the first like couple seconds or whatever. They added this like bendy melodic bass that isn't really doing it for me either. Yeah, I don't know. I'd probably stick with the original version on this one. Outlined surfaces extended, more of the same, I guess. Those are all the notes that I have written down for that one. Finally, at the end, Breathing Neutron Empire extended mix. I think the added like rustling sounds that they have are very nice. It gives me like a kind of like a Boards of Canada kind of like looser feel. It never quite reaches the higher energy level of the other alternate mix, which I think is a wise choice. I think this one works as like a seal the deal, like everyone has left the theater at the end of the movie sort of thing. It's just like a nice little like beat to take home with you on the car ride home. So I think that like just extending that out like a tiny bit, maybe if you live a little farther from home from the movie theater, yeah, I think it works. I think it's a good way to close off the album. So we're done. We made it. And my stream of consciousness has stopped, finally. This album, if I were to sum it up, I'm not going to give it like a rating or whatever. Actually, yes, I am. I'm going to put here, I'm going to rate this with a meme. This is the meme that I feel best sums up my feelings about this album. It was like, I didn't expect more to come from this concept, and then it did, and I got really psyched. And then I listened to it, and my hopes basically shot straight down for the parts that I was expecting to be really wowed by. But then there are other things in this that I appreciate, and I'll probably substitute out some of the original mixes with some of the extended stuff. Hopefully that gives you some sort of insight into like how I think about music and music reviews or whatever. This is totally not the album that I expected to do like a music review for, as much as I would do like a music review for bands that I get more actively excited for releases, like Rush or AQXDM, Aphex Twin, Eros, that sort of thing. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. I don't know if I'll do any more of these in the future. You'll have these videos here that you can check out with more of my regular content. And